Thank you, everyone. And thank you for bearing with us as we start this event, which I'm really excited to be able to open today. I'm Tracy Walsh, our board sponsor at WBD for Diversity and Inclusion. And I'm only going to say a few words because I know we want to get into the discussion and I'd like to leave as much time as possible for that. But D&I is something that we take incredibly seriously here at WBD. It's certainly been a huge feature of my time on the board over the last 3 years, and we've really ramped up our activity. And I have to say that reflecting on all of the work that we've done, the thing that's amplified our learning the most is talking, having conversations, sometimes challenging ones, but being able to learn from others, other organisations, not just people in WBD, but outside too. And so that's very much what I'm hoping we'll be able to take away today. I'm very grateful to everybody for joining, and everyone who in particular on the panel is participating to the discussion today. And with that, I'll hand over to Jess.
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jess Tresham. I'm a partner in the construction team here at Womble Dickinson. I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community and our WBD Pride group. So you're stuck with me as your chair for this event, I'm afraid. I'll be introducing our speakers shortly and the questions for the panel. But I thought what would be good to start off with really is, why are we here having this conversation today? And this was a question that we posed within our WBD Pride group some time ago about how can we be who we truly are when we're in the workplace. And I think as we return to our offices and our workplaces, many of those within our community find themselves once again facing those challenges that perhaps they had when we were more actively in the office of being their true and authentic self. And what I mean by that, I suppose, when I was thinking about introducing this talk today and our speakers and our guests is, it's that challenge, I suppose, of identifying as gay, bi, trans, non-binary at work. It was simplified by lockdown in many ways if you had difficulties with that, because when you're working from home, you can avoid those conversations that you don't want to have when you're dealing with people remotely. I think it's a lot easier to avoid having those conversations about your personal life and your whole self, your authentic self, whatever you want to call it. But, diversity and inclusion in the workplace really is top of our agenda here at Womble Dickinson. And I think us, along with many other organisations, we recognise that this is an ongoing and evolving process. It's not something that you can say, right, we've done that, we've got a WBD Pride group, great, tick, job done. I think having a workplace where you feel valued, accepted and respected is of paramount importance. And I think we know that research has shown that hiding your true identities at work can not only cripple your professional performance, but also adversely affect your mental health and leave you feeling really isolated at work. So we know that diversity is half the battle, and what I mean by that is making sure you've got a workforce that comes from all different backgrounds and communities. The next bit and the important bit is that inclusion bit and making sure that everybody feels included and respected. So today's about talking about those challenges. How do we bring our 100% of ourselves to work? And we're really lucky we've got a fantastic panel today who are going to bring their strategies and experiences, I hope, and some insight into these issues. So to welcome everybody, we've got Peter Wozni. Peter's a corporate lawyer who has a very successful city career and now is GC at Be Tomorrow Ventures, which is the corporate venture capital arm of British American Tobacco. So Peter spearheads the numerous diversity initiatives the fund is looking to be an industry leader in, and he also sits on the board of Be United, is that right? Which is BAT's LGBTQ plus employee network. And amongst many other things, he's a trustee on the board's numerous charities. We're also joined by Christina Lambi from the Law Society. Welcome, Christina, who joins us remotely there. Hello, I can see you there at the bottom. And Christina's the Diversity and Inclusion Advisor at the Law Society, and her background as a British Sign Language interpreter led her initially to get involved with diversity and inclusion work in educational settings. We're also joined from the States by Mason Freeman, who's a partner at Womble Dickinson. He's a product liability lawyer. He focuses on technology and tobacco, and he's also the co-chair of the US WBD Pride Group. So welcome, Mason. Thanks for joining us. We're also joined by Rich Carpenter, who's our business development director. And Rich is an ally, and many of you will know that allies play a hugely important role in creating that friendly and inclusive workplace. Looking up a few things about Rich, I was interested to see that on our workplace hub, it says on Wednesdays after work, he likes to repair electrical appliances free of charge. So that's really good to know. And he has yet to find a way of explaining marketing to lawyers. So we're really looking forward to Rich's contribution today. Hi, Rich, welcome.
Hello, I didn't realise you'd read that.
Oh, I do my homework. Last but certainly not least, we're pleased to welcome even Leng Montgomery. Leng describes himself as a passionate trans diversity and inclusion senior consultant who actively engages and consults with private and public sector companies. Leng is a regular speaker within the D&I field and has appeared on the BBC, TV, radio and in print in publications such as The Guardian, Independent and The Metro. And this is the bit I like the best, I think. In 2014, he was the first openly trans contestant on BBC's MasterChef. So that's fantastic. So thank you everyone for coming. I think we've got a few questions that hopefully will be around this sort of subject, which I'll kick off. And the first question is actually for you, Peter, is how would your career have been different if the workplace had been more inclusive for LGBTQ plus people?
Thanks. So I think for me, it's best to start right from the beginning of my career when I was working at Freshfields. I was working in their London office and I got offered the secondment opportunity to go out to their Moscow office for 6 months.
Wow.
And I thought that was a fantastic opportunity to be able to go out and kind of expand on my kind of knowledge. I hadn't been to Moscow at all, thought it was a great experience. So I decided to accept the secondment, jumped on a flight, packed my bags and arrived in Moscow in the middle of December and came to this kind of very cold environment, beautiful city. But when I joined the Moscow office, I realized it's a very kind of homophobic, kind of closed environment there. I couldn't be myself. And the first few months I found I struggled to settle in. I wasn't kind of working that well. My productivity levels were down compared to what I was doing in London, and I wasn't enjoying myself. I then decided to reach out to the. I wasn't open as well. I was hiding myself from being gay, and that was probably the root of the issue. What I did then was to reach out to the London office to find kind of support, because they had a big kind of being a Magic Circle law firm, that they had a big kind of LGBT network, but it was all based in London. So they kind of reached out and they supported me, and I went through some kind of trainings with them and had lots of kind of got myself a mentor in London, and then I kind of rediscovered myself and brought the confidence to come out to the kind of the UK, first the UK based partners in Moscow, and then slowly to the entire office, and then I slowly built the confidence to set up the LGBT team in Moscow and then start mentoring kind of other people in the Moscow office. And from staying there from 6 months, which was my original kind of expectation, I ended up being there for 3 whole years. Absolutely loved the experience, ended up kind of falling in love with the city, learned the language, found myself a partner in Moscow at the time, and kind of really developed my career and took a lead in being kind of like a poster boy or just kind of like the person for people to look up to for being themselves, and that really improved just my not only my firm profile within Freshfields, but also my kind of career progression and to become a successful kind of lawyer and person in the office. So that was my kind of coming out story in Moscow, and it even though it's a big step forward to make that decision, and especially coming out to yourself is one step, but coming out into a workplace where it's not right to be gay, it's much harder. And then on the big picture, you're educating kind of a culture where it's not right to be gay, and slowly kind of teaching those people in those kind of in those jurisdictions in those countries that actually I know someone who's gay and it's actually all right to be gay. So I absolutely loved that experience I had, and then I came back to when I changed jobs and I moved to Brown Rudnick, which is my second firm I joined back in London. I then kind of decided I need to carry on this work, and I set up the LGBT team in the London office of Brown Rudnick, and ended up being co-chair in our diversity network, and just started kind of making sure inclusivity is kind of top on the agenda in the firm, and then also with clients as well.
How important do you think it is for people to have that Pride network or LGBTQ network in the workplace? I mean, you just said that, you know, you set it up at Brown Rudnick. I'm assuming that wasn't all that long ago. So we're not talking that long ago before these sort of networks didn't exist at all. And, you know, people like yourself in offices could feel very isolated. I mean, how important do you think it is to have that support network?
It's vitally important, especially in those jurisdictions where it's not right to be gay. Yeah. And then you're also setting an example to your clients and to the people you're working with, and they want to see that, and kind of it's spreading the word, and it needs to be done from all angles. Yeah.
I completely agree. I would say to the other panelists as well, if you want to sort of chip in as we go along, it's you know, please feel free to do so. A question for you, Leng, I guess kind of linked to what Peter was saying as well, but I introduced Richo as an ally. I mean, how important do you think allies are, and how can they show their support for the LGBTQ plus community, or particular parts of it? I mean, what role can they play? I guess Peter was just sort of talking about the Russian office, and I guess, you know, having allies and straight colleagues there must have really helped you stay and feel supported and wanting to stay there, I guess. So, I mean, what's your insight on that?
I think that's a really great question. I think allies play a really, really critical role in a way that actually all of us need to be each other's ally now, in particular, because, you know, I say this, I've come out 3 times, not because I got presents every time. Well, I stopped getting presents, and my mum often jokes and says that, you know, I just need a revolving door fitted to my closet, I think, and that would probably sum it up. Because for context, when I first came out when I was 15, that was as a lesbian. I'm a bit too hairy to be one now. And then 12 years ago, I started to transition, and now I've come out as bi. And the thing is, in each of those situations, they are very distinct and individual. Every step of the way, it supported me as allies, but also the reason why I say we have to be each other's allies, because, you know, I think there are so many different privileges, there are so many things around. Actually, the same people that will marginalise and attack one group of people, they will move to another quite rapidly. But also, as a transgender person, for example, unfortunately, I have experienced transphobia, but that has come from lesbians and gay men as well. Yes. So, and it's not, it's a horrible thing to have to say that, actually, but, you know, but I have been in situations where I've needed that, in the same way that it's important that where we do carry a privilege, or just making it be known, really, with allyship, it's just about making it be known. If you don't stand for a certain type of behaviour or people being treated in a certain way, like, you step up and you help. And the example I can give, actually, I was in a place that, ironically, working as a senior diversity and inclusion person, which is what I've often worked in. So often I'm sat within corporate HR, usually, in most places where I go. And an example of an ally, because I had actually recently done some training with everyone on my floor about being an ally, actually, and it was quite interesting to see how things do impact. Because I think sometimes with being an ally, it's not about being big, shouty, having a protest in someone's face. It can actually be about just disrupting us a little bit. So what had happened, and I was really amazed at this. So I mean, it's great being in an office today, actually. It's a bit of hyperstimulating. I'm like, ooh, people, you know, this is quite nice. But, you know, I remember one morning I just got to work. We had a sort of open plan, like, where you could go and sit, and got in, hadn't even taken off my coat. Some person just turned to me and they said, oh, I've been watching Good Morning Britain. Did you see what Piers Morgan was saying about non-binary people? And I was thinking that music from Jaws was in my house, like, uh-oh, where's this one going? And they were like, well, you know, with the way that people identify with themselves, well, you know, that is just how normal people think. And I was like, well, you know, I was just sort of felt really, and then they were like, oh, we forgot you're trans. Oh, and have you been watching RuPaul's Drag Race? And it was just this literal barrage. And I was just like, I just didn't even know what to say at that point. But then interestingly, there was someone that was actually the very quiet person that normally, to be honest, you know, someone that's, you know, in offices that's so quiet that they suddenly pop their head up and I was like, oh, they're there, you know, but they were just like, I think you're using some really bad stereotypes. And also why, just because you know that Leng is transgender, why is he going to have the answers for that? And why don't you just let him get a cup of tea? And I was like, wow, I was like, that was just quite an interesting moment. But it was interesting to see where, you know, that sort of ally type message had carried through. And I think other ways though people can, I mean, that's more of a direct confrontation, but I just think other ways people can just be allies is just subtle disruptions. So just by saying simple things like if you've heard some information that you think, oh, that's a bit dodgy or that's not quite right, just saying, oh, isn't that a bit of a stereotype, or where did you hear that from? You know, because it's just those little things can do that. But also if you see that someone is being singled out a little bit, I just think it's really important to make people feel safe or comfortable. And another thing that's handy is if someone is on the receiving end of something that isn't very pleasant, just checking in with them, see how they are, because that can make a big difference as well. And especially if you are the person that's been on the receiving end of things, not feeling like the odd one out or feeling that there's something wrong with you, I think is really important. So that's a really great thing that allies can do.
That's really, and I would that's really insightful. Sorry, Mason, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Just add one thing to Leng's comment about pushing cultures in organizations and nudging them along to a more inclusive environment. Having allies be a part of your affinity groups is extremely important. There's something really empowering about feeling like you've got the entire organization behind you, and that as a member of an affinity group, you're not just siloed off into your own corner, just talking to one another. To have allies within the organization, particularly in the leadership of the organization, participating actively in your groups. Here at WBD Pride, we have a lot of allies who have stepped up and gotten very involved and have shown up, both literally and putting their money where their mouth is. And I think that's incredibly important because that shows that the organization not only wants its diverse employees and partners to feel like they're a part of the organization, but shows that there's actual investment in that. And so I can't speak enough as to how important it is to have allies actually be involved in the day-to-day running and participation in our groups.
I think I'd actually,
I agree.
I'd add to that as well, actually, Mason. I think, you know, from an allied perspective, we need to take a responsibility to learn and to listen and to kind of educate ourselves. And I think that mindset is something that, you know, allies can really work on. And someone said to me the other day that ally is an action, not a label. I thought that was quite a good way of summarizing it, that there's no point just calling yourself it. You have to do something. And I think as well from my role in terms of looking after communications in the firm, I think it's really important that we all are conscious on how important, you know, language is within this. You know, and that's not only kind of everyday language such as, you know, chatting to someone in the office or on the phone, but actually sort of written, centralized communications. And I think, you know, we're making a lot of effort to try and, you know, do gender neutral communications, making a lot of effort to kind of get pronouns correct, and just in day-to-day language around the firm, you know, talking to someone about their partner, and I don't mean partner in the legal sense, partner as in the life partner sense, you know, that's not offensive to anyone, and it covers everything, and everyone can learn to do that. You know, there's nothing more embarrassing than asking someone how their wife is and then saying, I don't have a wife, I have a husband. And I think that sort of thing is something allies can do. You know, and if we sort of confront our own prejudices and confront our own biases while doing that, it creates a more open environment, and allows the fact that, you know, sometimes people are going to mess up, especially allies, you know, they're going to mess up, but, you know, take a breath, maybe apologize, and actually then, you know, ask people for guidance, which kind of loops back around to that educational point. But I think there's a big mindset piece there that we can all take responsibility for.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rich. I think a big part of it, I mean, for me, I suppose, with allies is taking the taboo and the mystique out of it. Is just, you know, people of the LGBTQ plus are just people. just like everyone else, and we all live different lives, and what we do at home, you know, you don't necessarily also have to bring to work either. You have the choice, I think, to be as much and share as much information as you like. But you're absolutely right, I think, in terms of the language we use with each other in the workplace has to be mindful of everybody's background and communities and where they may come from. The amount of time, I've got a couple of kids, often, you know, people will say to me, oh, you know, what does your husband do? And I have exactly that conversation. So never had one, thanks. You know, and I don't mind because I'm used to it. I must have said that so many times, but, you know, for the person on the receiving end, it can be slightly, you know, you can see them sort of cringe a little bit because they feel embarrassed. So I guess it's an educational thing as well, isn't it, in terms of, you know, what we can also help with as a WBD Pride group as well, with the allies that you know, we're really grateful that support our community. Christina, I guess a question for you, just leading on from that. I don't know if you can share with us perhaps what, you know, the Law Society are doing on the ally side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've been saying really mirrors some survey results that we released about a month ago called Pride in the Law report. And that was allies as well as LGBTQ people replied to the survey. And it very much mirrors what we were talking about. So standing up for your colleagues, and it's exactly right, it doesn't have to be a great big song and dance or a scene, but standing up for people and speaking out if you feel like you need to, and educating yourself also comes through. You know, I mean, very much at the Law Society, I support the LGBT plus committee lawyers division, and we have a LinkedIn page, and we always stress to people that they're very welcome to join that page, even if they're allies. All allies are welcome. And just an observation generally in my D&I work, that I feel that the LGBTQ community is really quite well advanced in talking about allies, whereas other equality strands, like, for example, race, I think people are only just now taking baby steps to acknowledge that, you know, sticking up for colleagues, family, friends who are racially discriminated against, you know, that community needing allies too. But I feel like it's quite well established within the LGBT plus community, which is a really positive thing, as we've just outlined.
Do you think the LGBTQ plus initiative, including the staff network, pays enough attention to including all parts of the community, though, to perhaps intersectionality into all within the organisation, both legal and business services? Because I think sometimes forget, I guess, the law firm is made up of 50% of non-lawyers, at least. You know, there's all the business services here. You know, it's business services that's made today possible, and just remembering, I guess, that, you know, it's everybody within that legal business.
Yeah, I mean, I personally feel it's really tricky sometimes with staff networks. I think the really important thing is to have a very clear agenda and some kind of strategy to implement that. And so you get that intersectionality piece. It means that you can work with other networks in your organization towards a common theme. But the intersectionality piece itself is quite a new piece, I would say, because, you know, obviously Professor Kimberly Crenshaw originally wrote about it in the 80s, and it was to do with the prejudice that Black women faced that she identified. And I think obviously it's very much an important theme nowadays, but I think people are very much at the beginning of the journey when it comes to intersectionality. So I do think it's that thing of thinking that people are multiple identities and embracing that. But I also feel very strongly that people need to be supported, you know, to run and you know, really make networks successful. It can't just be a sort of add on, or, you know, you do all your work and then at the end of the day you can do this. No, I really feel like you need to support volunteers in their work, in staff networks, and also, you know, to combat things like role model fatigue. So if you do, for example, only have maybe one trans person who's out in your organization, not asking them all the time to do different things because you don't have anyone else, which is why I feel collaborating with other firms or other organizations and linking up with them, especially if you're a small organization and you don't have many people. I think it's really good to look outwards as well as looking inwards, but I do feel people need to be supported to do that, and sometimes with hierarchical structures it starts from kind of top down, so that senior leadership buy-in.
I think I'd add to that as well, that in terms of sort of, you know, the concept of insider within, I think is really important, that we're conscious of that and we're respectful of that. I mean, someone can be a great lawyer working in what seems like a good firm, but they can feel like an outsider. And I think that it's really important, especially maybe from an ally perspective, it's really important that we understand that you know, that their performance and perhaps their own mindset can be at complete odds, which I think goes back to the original workings on it, didn't it? You know, that a black woman could feel as though she's an outsider within, despite being an expert. And I think it translates across to all minorities now. So we really should should work at that and should be conscious of it.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Just sort of taking a slightly different angle, just conscious of time and the multiple issues that I'd quite like to get through today. We'll see how we do. But it's just a question for Mason. I think it'd be useful to have your sort of insight on this is, you know, how can individuals or organisations deal with staff, in your view, who make those anti-LGBTQ plus comments, jokes, banter? So many times, you know, we've heard it being called banter when actually it can be, you know, incredibly damaging to a person. You get those negative touch points, and it can only take a few sometimes to really, you know, impact on someone's performance at work. What can be done, do you think, to sort of be able to step up and challenge that sort of behaviour, which isn't always easy, I think?
No, you're right. It's absolutely not easy, and we want our employees to be able to focus on doing good work and serving our clients and being productive, and to have the additional burden of having to deal with comments like that is unfair and decreases productivity for everybody, and is quite hurtful. You know, in the US, there are varying degrees of protection for those types of comments, which in some contexts could be deemed as actual harassment. And so hopefully your organization has appropriate measures in place and training so that your employees feel that if comments like that do rise to that level, they can go to HR or go to their supervisor and make sure that they feel like they're going to be protected in reporting those types of comments. But very often, these types of comments may not even rise to the level of direct harassment of one person. It may be a comment on something that they saw in the news. It still feels like, you know, both in the US and the UK and in other places, transphobic comments are still completely acceptable. You know, just making fun of someone's appearance or just expressing disbelief that transgenderism can exist as a concept, or that transgendered people exist. And so it's a difficult line to draw in terms of what you report and what you don't. Hopefully your organization has robust procedures in place so that employees know that they can feel comfortable reporting it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that the most important thing we can do is to try to create a culture where people understand that those types of comments are completely unacceptable. And I think you do that by making sure that you have LGBTQ plus individuals in the leadership of your firms and in your organizations. If you have people in authority who actually hold those identities, then people are going to automatically know that that type of commentary is not acceptable. And so we need to make sure that we're putting diverse and inclusive viewpoints in leadership, both LGBTQ plus individuals and allies who make it clear in their own informal conversation and banter that they are absolutely supportive of all people and all employees. And by doing that, you create a culture where those types of comments aren't acceptable in the first place.
I think adding on to that, you also have to go back to the whole allies point and kind of having a supportive team around you, because quite often there's these small little throwaway comments which people don't realise they're offensive. But if an ally or has listened to that and understands that it's offensive, they need to stand up and speak out about that and educate the person who said that and said, actually, look, this isn't right what you've said. And it's just standing up and just making a note so people understand what can be said and what can't be said.
And it's not always easy to do that, is it? I mean, Christina spoke earlier, or it might have been you, Leng, apologies, about that sort of role model fatigue, and I can relate to that a bit. And, you know, sometimes you can't be doing all of that on top of your day job as well. And it's that balance, isn't it, of sort of being, you know, who you are, being supportive of your community, but also not being the person that's constantly flying the rainbow flag.
Absolutely. And I think also, like, you know, these kind of behaviours as well, that can really impact your retention rates at your firm, and also or organisation, and reputation as well gets a whacking. One of the first places I look sometimes, yes, I look on websites to see if there's the sort of the general statements of, you know, bring your whole self to work and stuff. I have a good look on Glassdoor. That gives you quite, I mean, interesting. There's one data point I never quite believed on Glassdoor. No one, it seems, anywhere in this world is paid correctly, it seems. That's one running theme that I've noticed on there. So, but the thing that I look into is actually sometimes, and I have put in keywords before, like, you know, banter, that has come up sometimes, or about how things are actually treated. And the thing is, when we hear banter, banter is just a way of sort of dismissing. It's someone's way of, it's a bit of a cop-out really for dealing with an actual microaggression or a micro behaviour. But in fact, the thing is, a lot of this behaviour over a period of time, if it is offensive, I think definitely to Mason's point, doesn't matter where you are in the world, there are certain things that actually potentially, you know, sort of if a company isn't dealing with that, then that could be, maybe that might not be the best career move for you to join that organisation. And also as a leader, it's important that basically not on your watch will you tolerate certain types of behaviour, because initially with that sort of stuff, all it takes is a quick nipping it in the bud, or just being clear that, you know, look, we can have jokes that's not really that appropriate, or can we make sure we're including everyone in there? Or I've sometimes been around other men, if they haven't realised I'm trans, for example, being very, very sexist. And a simple challenge I've done when I've heard the sort of banter thing going on, I've just said, all right, would you say that in front of your wife, girlfriend or mum? Suddenly they're like, and I'm like, right, if there's that awkwardness, then you know you shouldn't be saying it, and think about another woman in your life right now. And then suddenly that just keeps it on check. Usually I'm not invited out to lunch or the pub afterwards, but then usually if they've been making those comments, I don't really want to join them in the first place. But, you know, but it's those things that we can all do to just keep the environment safe.
And I suppose it goes back.
I was going to say, just that I think there's also a role that a brand can play within this, that perhaps slightly takes the onus off the individuals all the time. You know, I was previously at Lloyd's Banking Group, and back in 2015, 2016, we did a big campaign that was the first time featured in sort of above the line media with a same-sex couple. It was actually two guys proposing with the strapline, "He said yes," and it got, you know, some really, really good coverage. But the interesting story behind that for me is that I was working on the corporate banking side of things, doing all of their marketing, and when I showed them what the ad was going to be, they were, you know, a bit uncomfortable, a bit difficult. But actually, by the time it had aired, we had a lot of support on Twitter, but we also got an absolute load of gay bashing on Twitter, and it was really offensive. And what was interesting is the MD of the corporate bank called me up and said, "What can we do to stop this?" And it was his mindset had just switched. So because the brand was out there, because the brand positioning was out there now saying, this is what we believe in, we are explicitly showing the world that this is what we see our values to be. Overnight, almost, he had wanted to protect and defend those values, and I think therefore, you know, the brand has a role to play in that type of thing, and can be quite powerful in making big stance statements.
Yeah, I mean, one of my questions for you, Rich, you sort of half answered really, I guess, but you know, we've seen before in the press and in commerce generally of companies getting it catastrophically wrong. I mean, what in your view is important when you're looking to be a positive role model as a business for any minority community, really? But you know, what in your view is getting it right?
It's quite interesting actually, and you know, the example I just gave you was an example where marketing really could lead the way, advertising statement. But I sort of have a phrase I tried to roll out. I usually roll out in these circumstances, which is it's demonstration, not declaration. There is no point me saying, well, we're great at this, we believe in that, if we don't live and breathe it day to day. Especially with diversity and inclusion, there is no point being out there, with a rainbow flag or with, lots and lots of sort of presence of a minority within an advert if you're not then, when you walk through the office doors, living and breathing that day to day, or at least living and breathing and progressing that day to day. Everyone's got work to do to get to the right place, but you have to do it. So in many respects, the communications and the marketing shouldn't be the first step. It should then be, it should be the demonstration, and then you can declare what you have achieved rather than declare what you intend to do. I think that's where most people go wrong, and we've certainly seen a lot of it in the last couple of years where people have gone out with statements that they just can't back up, and that's where, for me, they get it massively wrong. So yeah, just concentrate on doing it and then talk about it.
I mean, I guess LGBTQ issues have been a lot more prevalent within organisations. I mean, I think, Leng, do you think it's effectively job done when it comes to that sort of equality?
Absolutely not. I think, there's a bit of a perception. People think, oh, in some place there's equal marriage, or there's this or that. And the thing is, there's a lot more to do, because there is still a situation where being yourself is not always widely accepted. I'm still surprised at how many organisations, if they have someone that's going to transition or might be, it becomes in some instances what I've called the HR hot potato, because sometimes there is no process in place, there's no policy, and everyone's like, uh-oh, and then either it just ends up becoming it becomes a lot more complicated than it actually needs to be. But I think also making sure that other wording of policies as well is very inclusive to particularly people that are LGBTQ. Parenting, a lot of the parenting policies and things like that, it's amazing how many organisations I've worked in and seen where, just the suggestion that you might have two mums or two dads has become this really, massive concept to people. But I think also just knowing that a lot of things actually is speaking to people and actually knowing that people can be represented. And also the other thing is knowing that there's the right support for people when they are coming out at different stages of life and also career, because where we get ethnicity pay gaps, where we get gender pay gaps, I would love to see a big data project one day, which would be a huge collaboration piece, but where we look at the coming out gap, because I have noticed that at certain points of maturity at people's careers, particularly through LGBTQ, people are staying in the closet a lot longer than perhaps they need to be because of this fear of the impact of your career, or sometimes decision makers sometimes may be behaving positively or negatively, or people just saying, oh, well, people don't need to know about your private life sort of thing, when actually that is part of your life. So if someone can talk openly and say their partner's name about what they did on the weekend, if you're LGBTQ, you shouldn't have to hide that, but that is still the case in place right now. So I don't feel it's job done. And also I think that, well, globally, there are still not the same rights for everyone. That's why we continue having a focus here, and this is why we continue thinking and showing our support to each other, because things are not equal right now. And with any bit of diversity and inclusion and equity or any of that kind of work, it's never job done, and you can't get everything done in one quarter, so we keep going.
I mean, I do agree with you. It's obviously interesting to have your insight on that, and I think it's, as I said at the beginning, it's a constantly evolving process, isn't it? That as society's views start to shift, there's always other influences that can change people's views. It's like what you were saying about community earlier.
Just quickly add as well, even in terms of law, the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation as well, because sometimes some maps of the world can look really nice and lovely and inclusive, but if you put gender identity into it, some of the things that are still in place there are quite shocking. Like in some countries of the world, if I was going to transition, let's say, I would have to go before a court for them to formally decide if I can have a name change of certificates. Some countries, in terms of being able to make sure that you can actually even change your name or access hormone treatment, they require you to be sterilized and things like that, or you need to be certified that you haven't got a mental health condition and things like that. So there is still a lot of work to do there in those kind of areas as well. And then in other countries, for some reason, there's a couple I can think of where perhaps, you know, you may be able to transition, but being yourself in a sexual orientation, if you're in a same-sex coupling, is not allowed. So, as I say, it's still not a complete picture, and we don't have equal rights compared to everyone else. And also, other countries or in other places in the world as well, and even here in the UK, actually, people still might be refusing you goods and services, access to jobs, even place to stay, just based on who you are. So, you know, so sometimes when people say, oh, well, it's all right, you've got pride or stuff, I think, well, actually, it's not just about us letting out lots of streamers and celebration. There is actually, it's us just wanting to be equal. And I think ultimately who we are and who we love should not be up for debate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pride, you know, the pride issue is quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because pride is so important for our community, but in a way you kind of wish you didn't need it at the same time, in that, you know, if everything was truly equal, then you wouldn't need streamers and marches, however much fun they are. But do you see what I'm saying? I don't know if you've got a view on that at all.
Well, just going back into Lang's point, I think this is where it's important for the corporate to play its role. So big companies like Womble, Dickinson, it's not just all the employees you can teach, it's all the clients and the outreach you've got and all the different jurisdictions. British American Tobacco, who I work for, we've got 40,000 people all across the globe. And the outreach you have to each of those people and all the different jurisdictions and the impact the big corporates play on those different countries as well. If they step away from the market, think of the amount of taxes they're not going to be ploughing into those companies, and they've got the position of power to make the change everywhere. So.
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, more can be done, and I see what you're saying, that it needs to come maybe from lots of different sectors, I suppose. So you've got sort of policy making, the sort of work that perhaps Christina does, and then you've got the corporate and what their ethos and culture is, and that combined with perhaps government as well. It's got to come from lots of different areas to keep going. I mean, do you ever feel, Leng, that it could go into reverse in your experience and sort of how you work now, you know, the area that you work in? What are you seeing? Are you seeing positive steps, or do you think more can be done?
There has been a lot of positivity, but there has also, over the last few years, if we look at geopolitically, there has been quite a bit of rebellion as well. And I've been trying to unpick this for quite some time, you know, sort of. But what I have noticed, and the sort of analogy I've started to have in my head, but I think this is what's going on politically and globally at the moment. So bear with me a second, because there's a lot to unpack there. But whenever I've been in large corporations that perhaps have been undergoing a restructure, when that's going on, what I've noticed is that there's one saying that always gets said every time, and that is, oh, you know, if they go back to sort of in effect ignoring something innovative or supporting EDI, or it could be a good process, or someone that maybe isn't the sort of traditional candidate for things, they'll say, oh, well, we've hired this person because we needed a safe pair of hands, i.e. let's go back to the old default of what we are used to. What I think is going on a little bit in some areas is that there has been that sort of, where there has been all this dialing up of better equality and better sense of that. Lots of people like that. We morally know that's the right thing. But then there's been other people going like, oh, this is too new for me. I'm a bit scared. So they're leering back into certain areas, because I've been trying to understand like why this rise in conservatism has been happening in certain areas. Because unfortunately, like in the UK position right now, as Mason very rightly said, the way that transgender people are treated and spoken about is appalling. I gave a TED talk in 2018 about transgender representation in the media. Sadly, things have got worse since I gave that talk now. I am someone that doesn't often live in fear, but I feel scared when I see things going out in the media, because that does actually influence people, and people pick things up without realizing it. And you know, that, and especially if it's just a very negative message all the time, that does stick on people. I think the way that people sometimes think, oh, well, you know, well, gays, they've got rights, why would they want anything else? But, you know, in the last few years, particularly in the UK, particularly since Brexit came involved, and this isn't about Brexit, just to be clear here, but hate crime has increased in the UK quite on a large scale. We have seen, and a particular spike towards LGBT people, and it's becoming sort of accepted. And the thing with the transphobia that's around at the moment is it's acceptable. People think, oh, it's all right, and I think it's wrong with all of us if we think that with life in society that it's always acceptable to have a particular group of people that we can just be horrible to, because that isn't right and that doesn't support human rights. So I think to that point, this is why I think things are changing a bit. It's not such a bleak picture, but this is why I think the allyship and this importance of remembering that it is really important to keep these freedoms, this sense of equality, and also just this consideration of just being a human, and remembering that when we talk about other groups of people, these are people at the end of that. We are not a threat. And ultimately, as I say, whether you're straight, LGBT or not, you know, we all will love and have a right to love someone in our lives. We all have the right to be who we are as well. So I think those things are really fundamental. And to me, that is where being ourselves is a human rights issue. And so I think all of us should show our commitment to that, rather than feeling like, oh, well, I can't support this, and this, all these attributes, because you don't just leave other sides of yourself behind. You're always going to be a person in your organisation. If you want people to bring their whole selves to work, if you want to be truly representative of the world or the society you're in, well, you're going to have difference, and we should not be threatened by difference. We should celebrate it and accept it. And, you know, because when you give more equity or when you support things, you're not sort of taking slices of cake away from people and leaving crumbs. In fact, think showstopper. You know, you're making the best looking cake ever, because the more you include, the more you make it look interesting. That's what inclusion's about, and that's what our society should be about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a complex web, though, in a way, isn't it? In terms of how you can honestly make that happen consistently, I guess, across businesses, because there's no set rule book, is there?
Yeah, and I would add to that as well. I mean, let's not forget, I mean, speaking here in the US, same-sex marriage has only been deemed a constitutional right for about 6 years now. This is still very new. And while we have seen a sea change in progress in the last decade on LGBTQ plus rights, progress is not always linear, and we can't always expect that governments are going to do the right thing with respect to that, because all it takes, as we've seen with the tumult of the last 4, 5, 6 years, all it takes is one election to really steer things in another direction. And we have to make sure that as corporations, as lawyers, as law firms, that we are still hunkered down and being very mindful that a lot of this progress is still very new and could be taken away. And all you have to do, as Leng mentioned, you know, from a geopolitical perspective, look at what's going on in Hungary and in Poland, in other countries where things have moved very drastically in the wrong direction on these issues in the wake of rising nationalism. So I just want us to be mindful of that, and that's why it's all the more important that we continue to have these discussions, because these rights are very precious and it's still very recent.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I suppose, you know, as a final thought for everyone, it'd just be interesting to sort of go around the panel perhaps, and you know, it'll be interesting to hear if you've got a practical tip perhaps to make the profession more inclusive. Christina, maybe I'll start with you with that one.
Sure.
You can have more than one tip if you like.
Okay, great. Well, I think for me, what's really important, and I think this goes across all equality strands, which is why I think it's really important, is to really never make assumptions about people. I think assumptions really get us into trouble, especially in the workplace. So I would say leave those assumptions behind and keep an open mind.
Thank you. That's sage advice. Peter, shall I go to you now?
Sure. I think for me, corporations and society, all D&I topics need doers. Doers in terms of standing up and advocating for D&I issues. Doers about kind of reading about it and educating yourself. So if something goes on, you can speak up about it. And so it's just understanding the issues that are at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. Rich?
Yeah, I think maybe again from an ally perspective, you know, educate yourself. encourage all of the allies to educate us, and that comes back to you know, be conscious of your own biases. You know, don't make assumptions, all the stuff Christina was saying. Use language correctly, use language to your advantage. You know, use language to get yourself out of potentially difficult situations. But the education piece for me, I think, is paramount, and that's something that all allies can take upon themselves.
Yeah, and I think corporations can play a bigger role in that education piece, Rich. You know, we see there's a lot of noise, I guess, around Pride Week, and you see a lot of, you know, corporations going rainbow, and there'll be articles on the internet, but really it can't just be for a week or 2 weeks. It has to be something that happens all year round. Those communications, that constant message, it's, you know, if you're educating someone, you can't just teach them something once a year. It's never going to go in, is it? I think. Great. So I guess, you know, that's a role for me. My top tip is that businesses can play is be, you know, make this part of the everyday, I guess. Don't just leave it for Christmas or whenever it is you want to start showing your inclusivity. Mason, just over to you there. I don't know if you've got a view on, you know, any practical advice.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Rich's comment, and that for Pride organizations particularly, make sure that you are including allies and you are being very intentional about inviting them and including them in your conversations and in your events, because the way that we make change is for people to know each other better, and that can be as simple as having a drink with someone after work, and I think in the process of knowing each other better, there's less fear, and organizations where people know each other better are ultimately going to be more productive, and all employees are going to feel included.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that kind of brings us to a nice end of, you know, our conversation today, and I do hope that everyone listening has found it useful. We hope to do more of these events, and thank you to everyone that's attended today on our panel. Thank you to Joe Mitchell for helping to organise the event, and as ever to Tracy Walsh for championing diversity and inclusion here at Womble Bond Dickinson. Watch this space. Hopefully there'll be more communications from our group on the intranet soon. So with that, I will say goodbye and see you all soon.
Thank you.